Okay, so we're in the home stretch here. We're on our last component, the graphics card or GPU. Now, I'll be honest with you, very few people actually call it GPU. GPU is really implying the actual chip on the graphics card, the one that does all the, it's kind of like a CPU. This is your graphics processing unit. Now, on tests, whatnot, I may ask you questions such as, what does this acronym exactly mean? And I want word for word. So I'll be like, HDD, what does that mean? You're going to say hard disk drive. You're not going to say hard drive. That's not the same thing. Now, this is the one exception to that where I have a little bit of leeway because typically speaking, there's a lot of names that people use for graphics cards. They might call it graphics card, they might call it video card, they might call it GPU, all sorts of different things. That's pretty much what I'll accept though. Graphics card, video card, or GPU. Or sorry, not GPU. Graphics card or video card. You'll be fine with either of those. Okay, so this is our last component. Let's take a look. What does it do? What's the difference? First of all, look at the picture. Notice how big it is. It is massive. And this has changed over the years. Typically speaking, in previous years, it would only take up one half of this width. It would not have a fan on it or anything like that. Why does it have a fan? The same reason a CPU has a fan, to cool it down. It's doing a lot of work. So when it does a lot of work, it tends to heat up. So we need to give it what it needs to actually continue operating. Some of the modern graphics cards will even take up 3 slots, get a bigger fan on it. Some graphics cards will have more than just a single chip on them. Sometimes they'll have a chip for graphics, but they'll also have a chip for things like physics and things like that. And they're growing. There's some graphics cards are pushing things for like ray tracing and artificial intelligence, stuff like that. They're all kind of getting worked into this system. Anyways, let's go into the details. So when we talk about the human body alias for a graphics card, what we're talking about is kind of like the visual cortex. The visual cortex is how we see things, how we interpret that image data. So what does it do? It interprets, converts, and manipulates image data for display on the monitor or whatever device you're displaying on. Okay, so all those ones and zeros, they need to be translated into image data. So how does it do this? Just like a CPU manipulates binary data. This one does the exact same thing, but it's binary data specific to imagery. And as I said before, more so nowadays with things like physics and whatnot. But the focus of the GPU is to deal with binary data specific to imagery. So where's this thing? This is another device that requires super speed. All right, it needs the fastest possible, otherwise things are going to slow down. So again, it's going to be connected directly to the motherboard. So it's an internal chip connected directly. Are there external graphics cards? Yes, they are. But depending on the mechanism they use, yes, there are. Sorry. Depending on the mechanism that is used to connect the external graphics card to your device, that's going to be your bottleneck. Is how fast that data can get from that graphics card into the motherboard. Now you may buy a beast of a graphics card, but if only so much data can cross that path, it doesn't matter how powerful the graphics card is. So why is all this important? So we're going to finish this off now. Why is this all important? Well, first of all, nearly every household in North America owns at least one computer. Some of them own many computers. Now we're definitely seeing this. I'm making this video in the middle of the COVID-19/coronavirus pandemic. And we're seeing this issue with at-home learning right now with some houses have computers, some houses don't have computers, some houses have computers but they don't have internet, things like this. But on average, nearly every household in North America owns at least one computing device. So why does that matter? Well, because every household in North America also operates on a budget. Now, some houses have bigger budgets than other houses. Some houses don't even know their own budget and potentially are in debt as a result of it. Budgets are important. Now, as students, you may not actually understand that concept yet, especially if you haven't had a job or anything like that. Hopefully you have, and you've taken some time to understand the value of money. But let's say, for example, we're in this situation. Let's say you're going off to school. Now, some of you are going to go to college, some of you are going to university, some of you are going to go to trade work, whatever you decide to do. But for the sake of this demonstration, let's say you're about to go off to school, and your mom and dad say, "Oh, okay, for a graduation present, we're going to give you $1,000 to go towards your schooling." And you're like, "Okay, I need a new computer. I'm going to buy a new computer, and I have $1,000 to work with." So what's the first thing you do? Well, that depends on how tech savvy you are. Maybe you start looking at individual components because you plan on building a computer. Maybe you start opening up the flyers and say, okay, what laptop or what desktop can I get with this money? Now, the big thing about this is you need to think. You need to stop and you need to think. You need to think about, well, what do I need in my computer versus what do I want in my computer? Well, what is the difference here? Well, difference is how you intend to use the computer. Need is necessity. So let's say, for example, you are a art student, or maybe you are let's say, a journalism student. Well, an art student is going to need something like some form of image editing software, like Photoshop. Oops. Oh my goodness. Like Photoshop. Right? And journalism student, typically they're just going to be doing mostly writing and web browsing, things like that. So they just need some type of text editor. So they might need like Office, for example. Microsoft Office. Now looking at these two pieces of software, what does my computer need to operate these things? Well, in Office's case, we saw that it doesn't require a lot of RAM. It doesn't require a lot of hard drive space. It doesn't require a lot of CPU. So a pretty low-end computer would be sufficient for this person. But what if this person also is the type of person that loves to watch Netflix? Oops. Oh my goodness. Mr. Lane. Earned a spell. Netflix. And play games. All right. Well, maybe they both do that, but let's keep this simple for now. Now, looking at this, what does a Photoshop need versus Office? Well, Photoshop is a program designed to chew up resources. Because it's such an intensive program, whenever you make a change, it's got to recalculate so many thousands and thousands of pieces of data, which means it's going to chew up every resource you have if it can. So that means it needs a monster CPU, it needs a monster GPU, it needs all this information, it needs a ton of RAM in order to actually operate at its peak potential. So this one is going to require a lot more intensive of a computer than this individual. And then of course you have people that are programmers and law school, all that kind of stuff. So depending on what your needs are, well, you're going to look at that software and you're going to say, okay, well, now that I know what it requires, now I can go start shopping for a computer. Maybe, again, you're shopping for individual components, or maybe you're looking for a computer that satisfies those needs. Okay? Now you got to look at that computer and say, okay, I found one. I found one that is $700. Great. But then you look over and you say, oh, but this one for $900 has more RAM. It's great. And maybe it's got a slightly faster CPU. That's great. Okay. Now let's look at this and think about this for a second. What is the difference between $700 and $900? You're going to say, well, it's $200, Mr. Lane. You know what I'm going to say it is? I'm going to say it's the difference between bologna every single day and maybe some spaghetti, maybe some French fries, or maybe it is a night out on the town with your friends. That kind of thing, right? Place. That's the difference between $700 and $900. $200 equates to more life. So when you have a budget is not about getting the most amount of machine to get as close to that $1,000 as possible. A budget is about buying what you need to satisfy your situation. And then whatever's left over out of that budget can then be reapplied to other things, such as luxuries and food or entertainment, things like that. If you chew up everything you have, you've got nothing left. You may think, well, my $900 computer will last longer than the $700 computer. A $200 difference in a machine is not going to give it that much longevity. You'll probably still be buying a new computer at the same time. So it is really a toss-up. Now, if you're talking the difference between a $1,900 computer and a $700 computer, that $1,900 computer is going to last a lot longer, but you're spending an extra $1,200 to make that happen. So, I digress. So going over, I think I covered just about anything, but just about everything. But let's just quickly make sure. It's up to you to ensure the machine you buy will be within your budget, yet still be capable of handling all your needs. For example, a computer used by someone who simply browses the internet and uses social networks does not require nearly as powerful a machine as a digital artist does. Of course not. Remember, the goal is to spend as little of the budget as possible, not to get the most machine for the given budget. And that's super duper important. And that comes into the final part of how do you decide, and that's all about looking at your individual needs and then the requirements for those individual pieces of software and all the other things that you do. Now, that being said, these are wants. It's nice if you can do those, but if it's the choice between Netflix and games versus life, well, that's up to you to decide your priorities. If you'd prefer that, maybe you're a little bit more introverted and you like that kind of stuff, hey, have at it. Maybe you like those McDonald's fries. How else are you going to gain that Frosh 15? Who knows? Anyways, so that's about it for this lesson. Thank you very much for listening, and going on to binary and number systems next.